quite a few, and a few people have signed up this morning as well. So yeah, should have quite a good turnout, and we'll be recording it as well for those that haven't.
Looks a bit like the weather might be changing for the better. So we haven't got to be too long today, had we? Because those of you with any arable, I know some people were out last night because it suddenly dried up a bit. And other people will be wanting to get off and do some work, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be some listening in on a combine or a tractor as well. So.
This is the problem when you get into a webinar early, isn't it? Do you want to make a start, James, just to make sure we use up all of our hour?
Yeah, I think so. There's people joining just now. We've got a fair few on already, so we'll kick off when you're ready.
Yeah, we'll make a start because we want to make sure there is plenty of ample opportunity for people to ask their questions. Welcome everybody. I do see on the bit of screen that I can see a few faces on, quite a few familiar faces that we've worked together over the years and even recently. Obviously, this is a Dairy Roadmap meeting. The Dairy Roadmap, as most of you will know, is jointly run between Dairy UK, which represents most of the processing capacity in the UK, AHDB, which you will all know, and alongside the NFU. At this moment in time, the NFU chairs it, but we take it in sort of 2-year chunks. But it's very, very much a sort of working partnership that actually it works exceptionally well together. It's been, as I said, it's been going 10 years, and initially it was quite a defensive document. Even 10 years ago, we were getting a critical look at the environmental footprint of dairy. But much more now, it's moved into a much more proactive document, and actually it is being watched by other sectors as a model that perhaps they could adopt, and also in other countries. Other countries are well aware that we've got a dairy roadmap, and I see other countries developing similar things. And I think the International Dairy Federation is creating their own sort of roadmap, which I'm sure we'll be working with them to look at best practice as well going forward. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you could stay on mute, unless you're speaking, and actually if you turn your video off as well, that tends to make sure you all get better sound. And turn your mobile phones off might be a good idea as well. So apologies for that. As I said, the dairy roadmap's been going for 10 years. We've got Paul Flanagan, head of strategic director AHDB, who's going to give us a little bit on the aims and the work streams. Henry Clifford from Dairy UK, who's going to basically set the scene. Obviously, we've got things like COP26 coming along, the UN Food Systems Summit coming along as well. And then James has got 3 sort of very hands-on practical farmers that are going to tell us what it means for them. But there will be plenty of opportunity for questions. So rather than me keep rabbiting on, I'll hand over to you, Paul, if you like, and you can give us a bit of an introduction into the roadmap and how we've got it structured and what various work streams and how we see it panning out.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks very much, Michael. So I just want to talk about 3 areas. Firstly, what we're trying to do for the roadmap. Secondly, what work is going on just under the banner of the roadmap and who's involved. And finally, I'll just talk about some complementary work that other organisations are doing individually or governments are doing individually. And I think very importantly, what are we doing to tell consumers what we're doing? So we could just move on to the first slide, please, Phoebe. This is the aims of the roadmap. So I guess very simply, it's about firstly us demonstrating visible change. You only have to open the newspapers or look at the TV on any given day to see what the profile of climate change and the environment is up there. So we need to demonstrate visible change that we're making in terms of our role in climate change and the environment. Secondly, it's about best practice. Making sure we all move in step. There's no point, 1 or 2 organisations moving miles ahead of everybody else and other people at the back will be viewed by consumers in terms of how we're operating as the industry. So it's about striving for best practice, getting compliance with that, minimum standards, and driving innovation from that. And thirdly, it's about ensuring that particularly the economic benefits come through. I think we will know we get it wrong if all the costs end up in farmers and there's no additional money to pay for that, and other players in the supply chain are stepping back. So we need to make sure that economic benefits come through for the sector, but particularly for farmers. Just next slide, please, Phoebe. So I suppose the message I want you to take from this slide is we're working together as an industry. So as Michael said, in the steering group is the AHDB and NFU and Dairy UK with the governments that we pull in on an ad hoc basis just to do that. So we're, I suppose, the driving forces of that. We're in the hook to make sure it all happens. But within that, we've got working groups, and I'll talk in just a little bit more detail in just a couple of minutes. Well, we've got 25 plus people across 6 different working groups that we've got from different organisations there, and we've got, I think, from the stakeholder forums we've had the last 3, we've had an average 60 to 70 people across the stakeholder forums from people across the industry. So I think the message for that is this isn't about AHDB and NFU and Dairy UK doing this. This is a collaboration. It needs to be a collaboration, and when I talk about this. This is simply what we're doing within the UK. Michael talked about the International Dairy Federation, where you've got 43 countries, and I think it's about 1,200 people involved in various different working groups, which cover 75% of the milk production across the globe. So we're working really tightly with them, learning from what they're doing, making sure that we're not doing things that somebody else has done in another part of the globe, and making sure we plug in there. But just talking just a little bit about the working groups and breaking this down, Henry will present after me from Henry's from Dairy UK, and he's leading a working group just looking at ambition, and you'll be aware that there have been a number of organisations. NFU have set their net zero commitment to 2050. Arla have set a commitment for the whole supply chain by 2040 for NFU. Arla have set the whole commitment to get net zero by 2050 across the whole supply chain, and various different people have set different targets. What Henry and his group doing is thinking about what commitments and what targets and what goals do we want as a is a UK dairy industry on that, and he's got a number of people he's working with in that group. So NFU are part of that group, Arla are part of that group, AHDB are part of that, and I'm sure in subsequent webinars we'll cover just a bit more detail on where we've got to with that. Underneath the deliverable side, there's three working groups that I suppose I'm ultimately responsible for, but I've got people within AHDB who are leading that. So I've got two which are led by Nick Parsons at AHDB, one on baseline data. So as you can imagine, there's a number of carbon tools out there and measurement tools out there. What Nick's group is just thinking about is how do we pull together that information which is out there at the minute, and how do we put that in a common place where we can actually calculate that in a coordinated way. And he's got a number of people involved in that group. You've got Dairy UK involved in that group. I think Morrison's involved in that group. First Mill, Map of Ag, Rory, who you're going to hear from later, is a farmer who's involved in that group as well. And Nick also leads a group on best practice. So that can be best practice from the point of view of genetics, from the point of view of feed, from the point of view of carbon sequestration. And we have, again, a number of organisations involved in that group. So we've got SRUC, Arla, Muller are involved in that, NFU Scotland, Red Tractor, Leaf. Again, Nick Parsons leads that group from HDB perspective. And we also have a group looking at R&D, which is led by John Foote from HDB. So as you can imagine, we've got Agri-Epi in that group, we've got CL in that group, we've got Rothamsted, we've got Reading in that group. They're looking at R&D that we have currently within the UK, what the gaps are, what we need, also looking internationally to see what are other people, other countries doing, where can we share research, where can we nab that research and feed into what we're doing, and do that. And then finally we have groups which are underneath Judith Bryce, who's Chief Executive at Dairy UK, and there's two main remits for communication. One, advocacy. So how do we promote, how do we inform, particularly consumers, what we're doing? I'll touch on that just in a couple of minutes. But also, absolutely critical to this, and part of the reason why we're having it is farmer engagement. So we've got a number of people on this call. Clearly, we've got circa 8,000 dairy farmers just in Great Britain. So it's how do we engage farmers on that? How do we handhold the farmers that need a bit of handholding? How do we bring in support from people who have been doing this for a number of years? And how do we get involved in that? And finally, we have a stakeholder forum. So I think we've had 3 meetings on that. As I said, 60 to 70 people attending those meetings. And we've got a whole range of people attending that, from farmers to farming unions to retailers to food service to consultants on that. And that's proving not only a really good sounding board for us, it's proving really good recruitment for us to pull people into the working groups where they've got particular expertise, but also from a coordination point of view and engagement with the industry, it's proving really useful. Just next slide, please, Phoebe. So I just wanted to talk about just some other things which are not directly within under the banner of the roadmap, but still very complementary on what we're doing. So at AHDB, hopefully you'll all be aware we've got a network of strategic dairy farms. So you may well have attended those meetings before COVID in person or seen a webinar on that. So we've got a network of farms right across Great Britain on that. And what we're in the process of doing now is recruiting some strategic dairy farms which will focus specifically on the environment. So we're looking for a farm in England, one in England, one in Scotland, one in Wales on that. So if anybody's particularly interested in that, then I would say either contact me or my colleague Nick Parsons at AHDB, who runs the strategic dairy farm program. I suppose what we're looking for is somebody who has been maybe in the journey on this for maybe 3 or 4 years, rather than somebody who's just starting out on that. But I think if we have specifically environmental farms, it will help us to learn, it'll help us to share information, and should act as a magnet for policymakers in England, Scotland and Wales there. I think secondly, the Welsh Government are currently funding a piece of work on net zero farm modelling. So obviously, doing carbon audits and doing that on farms in the minute will help, but we can do some modelling into the future. That will help, I think, some of the decisions in the short to medium term. So we should get the first outputs of that back end of this year. As I said, the Welsh Government are funding that, and they're looking at 3 different farm models on that, and maybe again in future webinars we can share that. I think thirdly, this week at AHDB we've launched an EnviroCow index. So that looks specifically at feeds, getting the right amount of feed in there, lifespan, fertility, and milk production just within that index. So again, if anybody's interested on that, then we can. I'll maybe put some details in the chat, just a link to our website on that. And finally, just on the complementary activities, both of us, so AHDB and PROMAR, have been particularly useful in the past for doing a review of evidence out there and in terms of transition to net zero. So PROMAR does some stuff for us already. The Welsh Government are funding some additional work on that, and again we will share that, and that will feed into the working groups. And the final point I just wanted to make is that, yeah, it's okay if we do all this stuff ourselves as an industry and make improvements. We have to tell people, and we have to tell particularly consumers on that. So linked into what we do from an environment work is we have a Eat Balanced campaign which we ran as a pilot at AHDB in January, and we talked about what we do on the healthy aspects of dairy, but we also talked about what we do in the environmental space. And we'll run activity during this financial year again on the Eat Balanced. So social media run throughout the year, and we'll do a TV campaign in January as we did last year. So pretty active in January, as you can imagine, because the vegan campaign is happening as well. So we'll do that as well, but we'll focus specifically on the environmental side of that. So I think that has to go hand in glove. The other thing we're doing, and we're recruiting social media ambassadors. So anybody who spends any time on Facebook or Twitter will know that there's a number of people out there who don't like what we're doing and wish we wasn't any dairy cows around. So if you're interested in being a social media ambassador and actually resetting the balance a little bit, then again, please contact me or probably James at the NFU. And people that are interested will set up training sessions for you to equip you to be able to do that. But it's just about resetting the balance. And the final point for me is we're going to run some communication activity in the run up to COP26. So James is leading in terms of the production of a video. But we're also, and it's again going back to being inspired by other people across the world. There's some things that Dairy Australia have done. 30 things that they're doing within the industry to reduce the environmental footprint. So we're pulling together aspects of that. And there have just been many case studies we might do as infographics to talk about what we're doing on, feed or breeding or carbon sequestration or whatever, but just little case studies which are going to be easy to understand for consumers. So we're working on that in a minute, and again, we'll share that over the course of the next month or so. So that's me. So I don't know if it's back to you, Michael, or it's straight on to Henry.
No, thanks for that, Paul. We'll go on straight to Henry. Just quickly to make a point, if anybody does have any questions, there'll be the opportunity to either put your hand up later, and we'll come straight to you, or you can actually write it on the chat. But we will try to make sure all your questions are answered. So over to you, Henry.
Great, thank you, Michael. Phoebe, if you could move on to the first slide. Thanks. Great. So I think the purpose of my session is to just briefly whittle through the context and provide some setting of the scene of what's going on at the moment and why this is such a pressing topic, as I'm sure everyone will be aware, but just to highlight some of the key issues and areas of focus. So as both Michael and Paul mentioned, this year is a very active year in terms of the global level and the global level of issues going around. On the screen I've put just 2 examples, but 2 major examples really is on the left. We have the UN Food Systems Summit. So this is the big UN summit really attempting to try and get some global level agreement on what needs to be done in the food system to really push forward on the Sustainable Development Goal agenda. This does span full sustainability, so it works across 5 action tracks, and these do encompass the full social, economic and environmental aspect of sustainability. So from a food perspective, it does go into depths around nutrition and malnutrition. as well as the environmental side. But there was a lot of areas within this of relevance to dairy, and kind of the global dairy industry is very actively involved in this process to kind of feedback key messaging and kind of feedback kind of results and inputs that hopefully will come out to benefit us down the line. Similarly, as many of you will know, we have COP26 being hosted in the UK later this year in November. The kind of key goals for the summit are listed there on the screen, but I think what we're seeing is this isn't just kind of on the political scale, the kind of the summit usually is, it's very much seeping out into the wider kind of industry and public consciousness as well. We're seeing a lot of activity around kind of companies and countries as well, just trying to actively accelerate ambition on climate. Many of you will have noticed the IPCC published on Monday its latest kind of update of its guidance and kind of evidence around climate change, really reiterating what they've been saying for a long time, but probably in the most stark and aggressive way, that climate change is a threat and action is needed. So I think in light of this conference, we're expecting to see a lot of increased activity in this coming months. So if you can move on again, please, Phoebe. So I think one thing I wanted to flag, and I think Michael briefly mentioned it earlier, is that there is a lot of work already ongoing on a global scale, and a particular piece of work worth highlighting today is this project being developed kind of in tandem across a number of global dairy industry companies, including kind of the International Dairy Federation, the Global Dairy Platform, and others, in collaboration with people like the FAO and other kind of key global stakeholders. But there is this kind of wantonness to look at how dairy as a whole can accelerate this ambition towards net zero, and what this specifically looks like for dairy, and how we can kind of encompass and kind of draw in greater ambition from all parts of the dairy community around the world. This is an ambition, I think, that's expected to be launched in September at the UN Food Systems Summit, and then I think the plan is to share progress on what's happening at COP26. As a UK industry, we're actively involved in discussions on this and hoping to use this as a way to kind of showcase the UK as a kind of a beacon example of the positives being done on this global scale. So if you move on again, Phoebe. So yeah, then bringing it back down to national. So I thought there's a lot going on nationally as well, and trying to distill this into a couple of slides was a bit difficult, but I suppose two aspects I wanted to highlight on the left and right here are some of the different kind of policy advices we're getting, and the different kind of competitions we'll be seeing. Is on the left hand side, you're seeing the advice coming from kind of government independent advisors such as the Committee on Climate Change, the UK Climate Assembly, perhaps not unfamiliar with the statement that came from the Committee on Climate Change, essentially saying that their belief is that diets do need to change, and that you need to reduce dairy consumption by 20% by 2030 in order to kind of meet the UK's climate targets. Similarly, on the right-hand side, we recently saw the National Food Strategy come out, and they equally had messaging in there similar to that, saying that cutting meat and dairy is necessary by up to a third by 2050. And from their perspective, this was deemed kind of central to helping to give back some farmland to enable them to kind of propose the future that they see fit for food in the future. In the middle is just some examples of kind of the policy specific areas. So we've got things like the government's 25-year environment plan, clean air strategy, the environment bill. We also have kind of incoming areas of strategy and policy that will be central to how we operate in the future. So we've got to be cognizant and mindful of kind of the incoming UK government's net zero strategy, which will likely make lots of recommendations across a broad range of policy areas around what the UK needs to do in order to meet its net zero targets. Similarly, in response to the National Food Strategy, the government will be publishing a white paper some point early next year on how they plan to kind of respond to those recommendations. So I think we'll equally see, off the back of both these global and national areas, a lot of kind of change in the policy space, and it's something that as an industry we need to be mindful of and look at how we can combat and respond to it. If you move on, Phoebe, thank you. So I won't go into all of this, but I thought it was also really important to just flag that it's not just in a policy level. There's an awful lot of pressure happening more broadly in industry, and on these slides I've got, it's just some few examples, both on the left from the retail perspective and on the right from kind of the food service hospitality. You can almost pick a retailer at this point and they're doing something on sustainability. Many of them have got actions towards net zero. Many of them have got actions around plastic and packaging. There is a constant stream of pressure from industry and how we need to act and how we need to do to kind of develop and change. Similarly, hospitality, we're seeing an increasing number of companies make pledges around kind of specifically relating to kind of veganism or to kind of dairy related sustainability. So it's an increasing pressure the processors are seeing, and that is likely filtering down to farmers as well. If we move on, I think the next slide is then taking this further. We also have the pressure coming almost on a more individual level and kind of from the thought leaders and influencer space. As many of you know, the impact of David Attenborough, the David Attenborough effect is huge. We've seen the power that single people and single campaigns can have to make massive change, simply looking at the kind of the consequence of the Blue Planet 2 documentary and what that essentially led to in terms of packaging. There are a number of very active influencers in this space and people of kind of high prominence, whether it be Greta Thunberg or a number of high profile vegan celebrities. We're seeing kind of increasing movements around kind of Veganuary and Meat Free Mondays, increasing kind of cognizance of this issue growing in the public domain. And increasingly, we're seeing the media get on board with this. And as many of you be aware, we're seeing increasing articles on this. That bottom point there is a headline from The Guardian, I think, at the end of last year, where they essentially revealed that they, in the space of a year, published over 3,000 articles, which I think equated to an article on sustainability in The Guardian every 3 hours. It's a mammoth kind of movement of thought and kind of discussion going on the space of sustainability at the moment. And it's something that really, I think the point to emphasize is this isn't something to go away. It's something that's constantly there. And as an industry, we need to work out a strategy on how we do this. And I think as us, as Dairy UK, AHDB and the NFU, it's very much the Dairy Roadmap is a strong vehicle to do this. So I think my last slide, Phoebe, is the next one. Thank you. But I suppose, yeah, that really just comes back to this point of really the role of the Dairy Roadmap in this and the way that we can act collaboratively in doing this is as we really do see this as a vehicle to help deliver this. And I suppose that lends itself to the kind of three key strengths of it is firstly, this is really an industry collaborative approach. It works across the whole supply chain, across all companies and all stakeholders. Its strength really lies in that we do have an aligned vision. It's something that we work collaboratively with to determine and try and work out what as an industry we can say and can deliver. And then finally, it's not just about making bold statements, it's really about setting that pathway to improvement. And that's what we're in the midst of doing at the moment, really, is trying to work that out and work out how do we go from A to Z, really, what is the goal and how do we get there? And that's where a lot of the work that's been discussed and what Paul mentioned is really being developed, is how do we develop that pathway for improvement and action? And then once we've got that, how do we better communicate that to everyone in the industry and beyond? Yeah, I think that's the end of my slides. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that, Henry. And if anybody doubted why we needed this group and why we're doing the work, I think just after you see the breadth and the depth of what we're trying to do and what's going on at the moment from Henry's talk, actually we do need this. This is something that has to happen. But it's I mean, initially it's there to make sure the UK dairy industry is shown in the best light, and we are sort of leading the way, I believe. But ultimately, we had a call last week with Frontera and Federated Farmers. They're on exactly the same page. They are looking at their footprint, they're looking at their environmental impact. And when it comes to things such as COP26 and UN Food Summit, actually we need to be working together as a global dairy industry. So it's not just to make sure we're in a better place, but it's a very, it's as a local role, but also a global role going forward to make sure that we're portrayed and actually we can defend the industry with data and facts and show the direction of travel. I'm going to hand over to James now. Obviously, James Osmond is the Chief Dairy Advisor. He's got 3 speakers, which I'll let him introduce now. So talking from a practical farm point of view. So over to you, James.
Yeah, afternoon, everyone. Yeah, we've been through a bit of the background to the roadmap in terms of what goes on in the policy world and the wider world, and with the big job we have to do with influencing people, consumers and decision makers. But we wanted to kind of delve in a little bit more to what it means on farm and give some sort of practical examples. And I've got 3 really good farmers joining us this afternoon to sort of talk through what they're feeling on farm with it all. Yeah, we'll introduce them now. So if you'd like to give a quick overview of your sort of system and what you're doing and then where you are, and we'll start with Rory. So over to you, Rory.
Hi, afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so I'm Rory Martin. I'm the Farms Director at Meisker College near Preston in Lancashire. So we have a mixed farming business across about 800 acres with dairy, sheep, beef, arable. The dairy enterprise is all year round calving. We milk about 200 cows. We are moving towards high input, high output. We're on about 9,500 litre average at the minute, moving up towards 10,000. We supply the co-op, so we've lower yielders tend to go out grazing during summer, and highs, not in calf, tend to stay inside. I try and run each of the enterprises and get synergies from each of them. So the arable cropping we do feeds back as feedstuffs into the dairy, bedding for the beefers, things like that. So and we have somewhere in the region of about 300 to 400 ag students on different courses across farm every year, animal academy, equine students, all sorts going on.
Thanks, Rory. That's perfect. We'll go to Dan next, please.
Hi everyone. Dan Burdett. I'm an organic dairy farmer. One farm in West Sussex, 240 autumn calving cows, and one in Kent, about 240 autumn calving cows as well. We supply Arla, very much looking at how we improve our carbon footprint, but predominantly our environmental footprint overall, rather than just focusing on one thing. So looking at biodiversity, planting trees, diverse lays, and getting more milk from forage. We're a winter house system, so as autumn calving, so we have all the issues that involves.
Thanks, Dan. And last but not least, Jimmy.
Hi, name's Jimmy Pritt. Currently a dairy farmer on a tenanted dairy unit in South Leicestershire. We're running 360 spring calving cows, milk supplied to a local Stilton maker who is just in the process of wanting to do a carbon footprinting for their cheese buyers. And then we're also at an exciting part in our sort of development as a business, and we've just taken on a new contract farming opportunity 5 miles down the road on 1,000 acres on a farm that supplies Tesco Muller. So we've got a steep learning curve in learning how Tesco wants to go carbon neutral, as well as another milk buyer just starting the process now.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think it's really good. We've got a range of different systems that being used here. So I'll go into some of that in a minute. But firstly, want to start with understanding what's the driver for carbon and tackling emissions on your various farms. You know, where are you getting noise from? Is it the milk buyer? Do you think it's a public perception thing, or is it something you care sort of deeply about and want to tackle yourself? And how's that playing out? So perhaps we'll start with Dan. What's your take on it?
Thanks, James. I guess it doesn't drive my business. I don't want one single objective to drive it. I think we try and look at our farms in the whole. So I've mentioned to you about the soils. The health of our soils really is the key thing. As an organic farmer, that's really where we've got to start. If I have healthy soils, I have healthy grasslands, I have healthy cows, we produce a good product. So I suppose I don't want to be driven by one particular metric. I'd rather look at the soil health indices that we do, but also when I dig holes, when I see the health of the plants and the resilience to droughts, and we're still working on that. I think the carbon tools are helpful in giving us a perspective on the efficiencies in our business and where we need to make improvements.
Brilliant. I think I definitely want to come on to carbon footprinting tools in a bit more depth in a second, but we'll go to Rory next. What's the driver for you in terms of carbon? Where's it coming from?
Yeah, for us, I suppose because we're involved in education, we're always horizon scanning, seeing what's coming up. It's obviously a very hot topic, as Henry mentioned before. There's a lot of legislation coming down the line. we've been, again, because we're involved in education, we're quite a diverse business. We've been a mixed farm for quite a lot of years, but it's kind of always been in isolation. We're made up of 3 separate farms, and it historically has been run as 3 separate farms, even though we're within a ring fence. And for me, the kind of a lot of the focus on carbon and sustainability and things like that is just leading me down the track of running it, viewing it as one farm and all the enterprises interlinked to each other. And as Dan's just said, you know, it's seeing that bigger picture, that complex system of, well, if I can get the soils right, it gets the grass growth right, which feeds the nutrition from my cows, which ends up coming out in the bottom line. And it's just using the resources we have on farm to the best effect, really, which has then you know, a spillover effect that it's good for the environment. There's less bought-in feed, less diesel usage, all that sort of thing.
Brilliant, thanks, Rory. And on to Jimmy. What's your take?
Yeah, thanks, James. I think there's a big relationship between carbon footprint, farm efficiency, and probably profitability. So I would probably say that, you know, we're in the business of you know, for the long term, which means, you know, making a profit year on year. I think you can probably relate it back to having efficiencies that mean less energy and everything else like that being used on farm, which in turn would, you know, hopefully improve profit margins. We're also, you know, as I said previously, getting more pressure from our milk buyer. So that's one of the key drivers. But I think we also, as a business, want to be seen as being at the forefront, being progressive. So I guess it's been on the front foot when it comes to, you know, trying to get to net zero, I guess.
Thanks, Jimmy. And I think that's a really good point there around some of the productivity and efficiency side of things, which, you know, I've obviously been involved in the NFU side of things and the net zero 2040 ambition. And, you know, the good thing about the dairy sector is a lot of the big drivers to reduce footprints are also really good beneficial things in terms of productivity and efficiency. So there's some good win-wins, it feels like there. But I want to, you mentioned, Jimmy, there how you sort of you've had some interaction with milk buyers on carbon and a little bit of pressure coming down the supply chain there. I just want to ask the other two, have you had any interaction with milk buyers? I think, Dan, you said you've done some bits with Arla, so do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so with Arla, but also with AHDB, because we're a strategic dairy farm, so we're using both of those tools. I kind of find it frustrating. I think the reason I'm on here is because I put a tweet out last week telling everyone how frustrated I was with the outcome. I guess it's always going to be so. I get the reason why we have to do it. You know, Henry's slides were really powerful. I think we're all on the same page, but we've all got different farms with different systems, different soil types, different geography, and no carbon tool is going to give us a realistic picture, taking into account what we're doing in the field. So I think we're always fighting this battle. And I think my frustration is that whatever comes out at the end of it is generally you need to make better use of your muck. You know, put a roof over it, put a cover over it. You need to use a trailing shoe rather than a splash plate, etc. So I think, you know, all the things that it ignores everything else that we're trying to do on the farm. So it doesn't matter what crops I grow. It doesn't matter how deep rooting they are, or, you know, if I mob graze or if I'm set stocking or whatever. So I think that's my frustration. I see it as a tool that we need to use, but I think it's always going to be a blunt tool until we can have a better way of assessing individual farms.
Thanks, Dan. Rory, what's your take?
Yeah, so we obviously, so being on a supermarket milk contract, we've had the sort of pure carbon accounting for quite a long time. They've been reasonably supportive as far as it goes, in terms of we have the meetings, we get our CO2 equivalents per litre of milk, and then we get told various efficiency things that we could put in place to reduce that. My issue with a lot of these things, and it's not just milk buyers and supermarkets, it's kind of the whole piece across the board on net zero and sort of carbon reductions, is that it's that CO2 equivalents per litre of milk is very easy to measure. It's a figure that we kind of all understand, but if that's how we start measuring everything, we will get forced down the road of, you know, ever bigger farms, ever more productive cows, putting more feed into them to get more litres per individual cow to dilute those emissions. And actually, as an industry, we're getting dragged in two mutually exclusive directions at the same time. You've got the sort of carbon efficiency side of it, which pushes you towards higher yields, like I've just said, and then you've got the 25-year environment plan, clean air, clean water, you know, increased biodiversity, mixed swards. Well, we've tried it on farm. We've planted a mixed sward, a herbal lay, and for our system, for high yielding dairy cows, you don't get the productivity you need from it to supply the nutritional need for those cows. So then we can't continue to be high yielding and reducing the CO2 equivalents per litre of milk. So that's where I sit with a lot of the advocacy groups that I'm involved in. You know, we're like Dan, we're an AHDB strategic dairy farm. I'm one of the members of the National Dairy Board. Paul mentioned I'm on the data group. That's the what I'm trying to get through to governments and everyone that will listen, is that it has to work on the individual farm level, and it has to be metrics that actually mean something and we can do something with, rather than just giving us all these opposing figures that actually don't really mean anything to our businesses.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point there, and I kind of want to move that on to another potential area of conflict, or it could be beneficial, is you know, how do you see consumer perceptions of what you do on farm versus you know, the outcomes you're trying to get on things like carbon or biodiversity or whatever. You know, we've got a lot of pressure from consumers on animal welfare at the moment, and you know, there does seem to be some areas where it could conflict, and things like housed cows, as you mentioned, Rory, are a little bit in the spotlight. And yeah, how do you feel about that challenge in your business, Rory?
Yeah, thanks, James. Public perception is always a massive challenge for us, because we are an open farm. We've students every day of the week, and within reason, we're open to members of the public all the time anyway. And it's kind of everything we do on farm doesn't just reflect on the farm business; it reflects on the wider college as well. So it's definitely something we're conscious about every minute of the day. But I don't know. I run it through my own filter, and whenever we have people on farm, I always say the same thing. If you see something that you think we could do better, or you don't agree with, or for whatever reason, please come and tell me, because there's either a reason for it and I can justify it to you, and I can justify it to myself at the same time and have a discussion and be challenged about it, or there is actually an issue I might not necessarily know about it, or there's a better way of doing it that I don't know about, and I want to know about it. But yeah, I suppose, again, like Dan said before, it's not something that drives our business. There's a lot of other factors that lead us in that direction, but it is now much more of a factor when we're making strategic decisions, and it factors into everything. You know, it's there underlying everything we do on farm. Well, how does this tie in with sustainability? And I always try and look at, you know, those three elements of sustainability: the social element of it, how are consumers, customers, the wider public going to think of it? What's the impact to our bottom line? And you know, then what's the environmental cost of it? So if I can tick 2 out of those 3 boxes, I'm more than likely to do something.
Thanks, Rory. I'll perhaps come to Jimmy next, around sort of things you've done on farm with regards to reducing emissions, either, you know, deliberately or because you've done it for another reason. But is there anything you've looked at on farm efficiency wise, or things like renewables that stack up as an investment?
Yeah, thanks, James. I think there's probably there's a number of things that we've probably done on farm, and as a consequence, it looks good for carbon footprinting. Examples of that are, we don't use urea now as a fertilizer, and that's purely because we didn't see the results in field, and hence, it's we don't use it, and it looks good for carbon footprinting. Another sort of method that we do use is we try not to plough any reseeds, purely because we want to look after the soil, keep the soil structure there, and we'll do any remedy work, any work that needs doing to alleviate any compaction. So I guess that's another tick in the box for a carbon footprint audit. Other things that we've sort of gone ahead and done on farm, we've put variable speed drives on milk pumps, vac pumps, and everything else like that. And that was before any grants were available for it, as we saw the benefits for doing it beforehand. We've also put in LED lights where needed to sort of save on energy consumption. So I guess, the whole farm, we've looked at energy consumption and challenged it, put timer clocks in where needed. And then going to cow health, really, we've reduced our antibiotics in the herd, which is another good tick in the box. So I guess there's a whole host of things that we've probably done as a cost saving exercise, but consequently, it's it looks good for a carbon audit, really.
Yeah, and I think there's a whole host of those things that's that are happening on farm that aren't necessarily done specifically to reduce carbon footprints, but done for other reasons, but then have beneficial effects. So I just want to come on to Dan, same sort of question, really. Have you done similar things, or anything good you want to highlight that's worked out quite well?
Yeah, along similar lines to Jimmy, really, as far as energy efficiency within the dairy, variable speed drives, and getting the heat recovery from the milk to heat the water up as well. On the other farm, they already had installed, when we took on it, they've got solar PV and a wind turbine, and then we will be installing more solar PV over there. They did do it when the feed-in tariff was there. When I've looked at it, starting it from afresh now, it doesn't stack up for an autumn calving herd, where we're producing most of our milk in the winter and most of our sunlight is in the summer. So until battery storage is better, then we're going to struggle to make that pay for itself at the time being. So it's not an option as it currently stands. And then I guess we're planting trees in fields, so we're doing things which you can't really. There's nothing that we can do. I can't tell you how much we are sequestering or not with that, but that's the way that I see things. Trying to do things actually within the farming system as well.
Yeah, there's so many multiple outcomes we're seeking as well, and certainly it's an area of frustration we see is there's a lot of focus on carbon and not necessarily things like biodiversity or soil, water, etc. So we'll move on to some of the questions in the chat, and I'll hand back to Michael in a second just to handle that. But I want to end on a quick one of where do you see this all sort of ending up? I noticed Richard Blackburn in the chat there says, is there a common ground in being carbon neutral and feeding the world? And trying to end on a bit of a positive. Do you feel like you can actually achieve it on farm? Do you feel like you can get there? So I'll go to Rory first, and then the others.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think there is common ground to find. I think there's a lot that we can. I mean, I would say this because we're a mixed farm, but I think there's a lot we can learn by sort of going back half a step and thinking about mixed farming principles that we used to use. So like for our system, we will grow whole crop wheat for the dairy cows, which works really nicely. We can then get in behind that with a cover crop over winter, so we're not overwintering any stubble, which we feed sheep on and fatten sheep, store lambs over winter. Then into a spring barley, which we crimp, so the grain from that feeds the beef, and the straw beds them up, and then all the muck from that system and the slurry from the cows goes back onto the ground and helps to build the organic matters in our arable rotations. And I think not necessarily on an individual farm scale are we going to go back to, you know, every farm having a few pigs, some arable, because you lose some of the efficiencies, and there's a reason why it's livestock on the west and cropping on the east now. But I think a bit more collaboration with our own industry, we can start to make better use of things. And then we do need to be careful, I suppose, with the whole sequestration piece and thinking, well, we're farmers and we grow green stuff, so we must be, we must be carbon friendly. The carbon audit that we had done through AHDB came back as really interesting reading for me. It's the first one I've seen that tries to account for sequestration, and it's not a precise art as yet. And that's one thing there's a lot more development for the science to do, but it came back to say that, you know, as a business, as a big mixed farming estate, which I thought we'd be pretty good at, we're only sequestering a third of the carbon that we're emitting through our normal processes. So that was a bit of a wake-up call for me that as an industry, it's going to be 10-15 years before we've changed our practices enough that we can start selling carbon credits and offsetting other industries as an income source, because we've got to sort our own act out first. So yeah, I do think there's a lot of work we need to do, but I think it's possible, and I definitely think there's a positive future there for food production, hand in hand with, you know, climate friendly farming type of thing.
Thanks, Rory. Jimmy, what's your take on it? Do you think you can do it?
Yes. Just following on from Rory's, he's made a few good points there. I think there's probably a few questions needed before we actually answer that. And you know, my net zero will probably be different to Rory's net zero, and how we achieve that. I think it also how it's measured is the key sort of thing. But I think one of the biggest things that will enable us to get there is, you know, we need to be resilient businesses that are profitable year in, year out, and without that, you know, we may as well give up now. So I think that's quite a few key things that need to be in place for us to get there. I think it's probably a case of looking at it simply is minimizing inputs and maximizing output to try and get to the net zero. And as was said previously, you know, it all depends on each other's farms. You know, such as the farm that we've been running for 7 years here is totally different to the one that we're about to take on in October. So there's going to be different ways and means of getting there. But I think with, you know, the report out on Monday from the IPCC, you know, it's going to be critical that as an industry together we do get there, really.
Thanks, Jimmy. And then Dan, final word before I hand back to Michael on that.
Yeah, everything's possible. I think we can feed the world by doing it, because there's so much wastage out there. I think the dairy industry actually is very good, certainly in the developed countries, at lowering wastage, probably better than the fresh produce industry. I think systems are going to go either one way. They're going to go more extensive, or they're going to go more intensive in order to meet these demands. So it's down to the individual farmer to decide which direction they're going to go. And I completely agree with Jimmy. Like, we've got to make money. That at the bottom line of it, if I'm not making a profit, then I'll just give up and I'll do something else. So, you know, we need that. You know, we need consumers to be aware of that. We need, you know, retailers. We always say this, don't we? But we need retailers to be aware of the costs of doing these things, and that the milk price reflects that going forward. And perhaps we need to change our market. You know, like perhaps as farmers, there's more and more farmers selling locally. more consumers buying with a shorter distance of travel, reducing the footprint of some of that produce as well.
Wonderful, thanks, Dan. I'll hand back to Michael for the other questions.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, all of you. That actually just shows the complexity of what we're trying to achieve and what drives all of us want to do it. I guess for the vast majority of farmers out there, their first real sort of encounter with net zero is when their milk buyer suggests they do it or insists that they do it. And many of us have done 2 or 3 now over the years, and the level of complexity within those. And I mean, the very first one I did, I was just amazed. It was such a light touch. It wasn't worth doing. And it's a very, very different case now where if my figures don't add up, my milk buyer will send somebody out to audit the figures I've sent them because it's not in line with the rest of the suppliers to that business. And that's quite a challenge, and it's usually a positive challenge as well. So I actually can't see the questions on the chat at the minute. So if Phoebe is there, I know she was keeping her eye on them. Do you want to call some questions out for me, Phoebe? Because for some reason I seem to have muted it, and my IT skills aren't that good.
Yep, no problem. We've not really had that many, Michael. So we've covered the majority, and I have taken a picture to send you through. Wallace Henry's just written in. UK methane levels have been climbing steadily over the last few years. What's causing this? There are not more cows. Yeah. Oh, sorry, something else just came through. I mean, I don't know if the panel want to talk more about that.
Yeah, I think I might hand over to Henry, but I think one of the things we need to look at a lot more in the dairy roadmap, and we talk a lot about at the NFU, is GWP star and how we properly account for methane in the dairy supply chain. So Henry, might be a good time to mention the work that's been going on that, if that's all right.
Hi, James. Yeah, so the specific one around methane levels, I think we do monitor them, and there is that noticeable uptick, and I think it's something that we're trying to get more information on, actually understanding the details behind it and actually where that's coming from. I think it's important to remember that whilst livestock is often attributed to methane, there are other sources. So I think it's just something to get a bit more understanding on. Building on what James said, I think we're also just conscious of some of the questions around accounting, and in particular accounting of methane. In the work we're doing as part of Future Ambitions, all of those questions are very much on the table and things to be considered and to hopefully incorporate within anything we do in line with science, in line with policy. And I think what we're looking at really is recognizing around the frustrations many have issued today around kind of carbon accounting, in that there's lots of unanswered questions, lots of disparities, lots of issues with it. Is we're trying to work out how best anything we do to take that into account, and this idea of whether we can do in any kind of industry level reporting and accounting, kind of dual or even like three-tiered accounting, can we measure it on multiple levels at once to kind of get some greater granularity in this and actually understand it under different circumstances, and just kind of not necessarily stick to this one simplified measure if there are other considerations that we could factor into that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just a quick one to throw in there. As I talk to farmers throughout the country, that they're really concerned that people outside the farming industry will somehow, I think it was Paul spoke earlier about, that if we're not careful, farmers will have all the costs and no benefit from net zero. Well, clearly there is a benefit from production efficiency, as all three speakers, all three farmers that spoke have just said. But actually, that potentially there's other benefits with sequestration and the way we farm, that farmers are very wary that somebody else outside of farming will actually make the money out of that, and we'll just carry the cost or go down the wrong route. And it's a question of a Paul, really. How do we make sure through the roadmap and all the work streams that we've got that if there are benefits there, and I believe there will be at some point in the future for farmers, that we actually keep that within the primary producer?
Well, that's an easy question there, Michael, isn't it? Yeah. I guess the short answer is I don't know, because inevitably, and historically, what has happened throughout the supply chain, not only the dairy supply chain, is other players in the supply chain, particularly the retailers, have looked to nab some of the benefits, and the farmer share has probably not moved. I suppose it's something we just have to be aware of as we go through the working groups and we get more clarity in terms of the. And we have got some detail from the work that Promar have done on the interventions and in terms of the best practice and the cost to actually do that. So we've got some visibility on that, and we'll do some further work on that. But we just have to be very clear as we move through various elements of that, and we do carbon audits as we've done for the strategic dairy farms, as other people are doing. That we just continue to monitor that. We will be clearer in terms of where the cost lies, and we have got a decent understanding right now in terms of the effectiveness, in terms of the various tools and reducing environmental footprint. But it's something, right now I don't have a specific answer, and I clearly can't give any commitment on that. But inevitably, if you've got different people at various places of the supply chain looking at that, everybody will want to mitigate their costs and maximise their benefits, won't they? So we just have to be very clear that from this perspective, certainly from AHDB and the farmer union perspective, we'll be looking at from the farmer point of view.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Have we got any more questions, Phoebe? I mean, I can't see any hands up.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to the first one. It's just picking the question out of it. Sort of more about genomics, really, a bit of a different angle. What do the panel think about sort of the role of genomics, whether we've got these new technologies like that coming through, that are they going to be of value? The question is how does the panel see the technical message around these kind of benefits and around carbon impacts? You can probably see the question as well, if that's an easier way to approach it.
I mean, obviously, the three farmers in the room, are probably at some level using different genomic testing or whatever. I mean, do you want to have a go at that, Rory, to start with? I mean, it is all about production efficiency again, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, I think that's one of the issues that we've got, is that this is such a complicated piece and we don't necessarily understand all of the science behind it inside and out at the moment, that the easiest way of measuring it at the moment is resource use efficiency, input use efficiency, which is the same thing we've been focusing on for the last 10 or 20 years. AHDB have done a fantastic job of highlighting to people the areas of improvement you can make on farm, but an average farm doesn't exist, and that's what a lot of these measures end up boiling down to, is what's the average. We try to use technology wherever we can to improve our efficiencies on farm, and I think that's the sort of message to take away for everyone that's listening in your own businesses, is do what makes sense for the bottom line of your business, but have an eye towards the sustainability side of it, and sort of use that as a lens to view investment decisions. If you've got two things that are going to pay you back over the same time period, which one is going to be more environmentally friendly, or which one are your milk buyers or the supermarkets or the consumer going to think is more acceptable or appropriate? Like, the biggest, I suppose, issue we've got as an industry of utilising new technologies is to have the capital available in the first place to invest in it. I say this to students all the time, it can be the fastest payback period in the world, but if you haven't got the capital there to invest in it in the first place, it means nothing. And I don't want to whittle on about all the technology we've got on farm, because we're in a different position that we can afford to spend money on new technologies and try them, because as a college, that's what I feel we should be doing. Is spending the money on things that are at the sort of leading edge, to evaluate them and then pass that back to the industry to say this worked and it's been really useful for our business and it could be implemented on any farm. This was a waste of money because its payback period was 3 times longer than we thought it was, and yeah.
Thanks for that, Rory. I don't know whether Dan or Jimmy, you want to comment on that, or we'll take one last question, I guess.
I think Rory summed that up pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Brilliant. Have we got one last question in the chat, Phoebe?
Yep. How about one about feed additives? Has anyone looked at these kind of algae or seaweed or other innovative kind of products? And where do we think the future is for that? Is it going to be an affordable option at any point?
Yeah. Do you want to answer that? Do you want to answer that, James, from a roadmap point of view, and then maybe one of the farmers could perhaps comment on anything they've tried? But I know you've been talking to AIC and various other people, and on the previous forum call we had, stakeholder call, we did have various feed companies along as well, didn't we?
Yeah, they're always really interesting things that comes along, and I suppose we quite often hear about a new one every week, which is sometimes quite difficult to sift through what is really exciting new developments and the ones that maybe won't last. But I think the thing we have seen recently is that Tesco in their pool are implementing a new feed additive which claims to be reducing methane, and that's probably the first large-scale commercial use we've seen of one in the UK, which be really interesting to see how that pans out. And I think what we've kind of looked at so far is that there's lots of things which look really good on paper, but when they're translated onto farm and in practical scenarios, getting the results longer term is not necessarily happening. So from a roadmap perspective, if we've got things that can help us with methane, brilliant, but we can't rely on them would be our take so far. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear if any of the farmers on the call have tried anything.
I haven't necessarily tried anything, but I know Arla are looking at biochar. So I don't know, I haven't been involved in anything in those discussions. I missed the webinar, but biochar is good for sequestering carbon. I don't know whether that's going to be fed to the animal or it's going to be put on the fields or what, but so the ideas are there.
Yeah,
I think it's a case of just seeing the research really, and just being aware of people not jumping on the bandwagon.
I think we also need to be careful about how consumers view it, because if you were sat in America, you would be saying that growth hormones would solve our carbon issues, because I'm talking about the beef industry now, but you get animals finished much quicker, less methane released. It's fantastic, best additive in the world. But in Europe, we've shied away from things like that for a long time. So I suppose we don't want to get caught up as an industry thinking that'll be the silver bullet and then be blindsided by consumers thinking, well, what on earth are you doing there? That's completely immoral and unsafe and all. Not that seaweed is that way, but I suppose it's much bigger, more complicated picture than we think it is. If we all suddenly start feeding seaweed, there's going to need to be an explosion of seaweed farmers out there.
Yeah, the one thing we have got as an industry, obviously we've got the CL Centre in Nottingham, and Jessica Langton that's on our board has just finished at Nottingham, and some of the work that she's been doing while she was doing a degree has been really interesting, and she brings a whole different sort of mindset. But I mean, James is right. I mean, this week already I've had two messages from two different companies that are telling me that they can solve the problems on net zero with two totally different technologies. And actually, we will, I will ring them back and I will have a chat, because you never know which one does work. But ultimately, we do have a facility at Nottingham in the SEAL Centre, and they're always, SEAL, and they're always looking for, projects which will make a difference on the ground that perhaps that farmers want to do. So if there is something of really, really specific interest, actually do get in touch with, Paul, Henry, or myself, or James, or Phoebe, because there is an opportunity to feed things that have got a value into that system and see what comes out the other end, potentially. And I know, Jessica's been involved in some of the work they've done in the past, which has been really positive. I'm really conscious that time is we've slightly run over time, and everybody's got a lot to do. And I'd actually just like to thank Rory, Dan, and Jimmy, because I think what you guys said is the reality of what's going on the ground, and it was and so I think you've really added to the debate. For anybody else that's been on the call today, thank you for your time. There will be lots of other opportunities to engage with the roadmap going forward. This is the first sort of farmer stakeholder group that we've done. I think both Dan and Rory, as he said, have been involved with some of the work streams. And anybody else that wants to get involved, just get in touch with Paul or James, because it is an industry roadmap. It isn't just the NFU, AHDB and Dairy UK, and it is evolving and it is changing. But one thing's for sure, it's not going to go away, and net zero and the environmental impact of dairy isn't going to go away. As somebody said earlier, James is pulling together some work for COP26 to make sure that dairy gets a fair shout at COP26. Do you want to just quickly say what you're doing with the video and what else, James, just for that, and how we're going to use it?
Yeah, I think we're very conscious that it's already started, really, the build up to COP26, and we know that dairy and probably wider livestock production and farming in general is going to be in the spotlight. So we want to make sure we've got a really strong presence, both to do with the actual COP event, but also with the wider public. That we've got this platform in the UK to talk about British dairy farming and our role. So we're currently commissioning an industry video to talk about what we're doing, all the way from on-farm and processing to the shelf with dairy, to try and regain a little bit of trust in what we're doing with the general public. So that's in production at the moment and should be coming out in the autumn and well in time for COP. And I think our plea, as Paul mentioned earlier, is we need the ambassadors. We need to amplify that message. We need to share these resources. So we'll help pull the resources together, but the more help we can get to push out the message, then that'd be very good.
Okay, thanks, James. Just before I think it is key that this isn't just our roadmap. So I can't say enough that if you do want to get involved, and some of you already are, then do get in touch, because actually it's a massive piece of work, and we just got to get on with it and make sure it works for the industry and puts the industry in the best place. Just like to thank all the speakers again, and Henry and Paul. I think it's been useful. We will be doing this again quite soon, but if anybody thinks we can do it better or we can improve on it, just drop one of us a line and we will, we'll get back to you. It has been recorded, so if anybody has missed it and you want to let them hear it, it will be available. But thank you all, and thanks for your time, and thanks to the speakers, and keep in touch. Thank you.